Thank you for having me. And as when I used to profess, not in a pulpit, but in a classroom, and students asked, am I responsible for this material? I would always say, yes, you should be responsible. Thank you for this opportunity to speak again. And by now, I have noticed that many of you have a confused social acumen. Maybe it's because it's 9 o'clock in the morning. Who knows? But this has pronounced me either as a member of a belletristic tradition, the arts and letters traditions, or a performer in a traveling theater troupe. Your notions of the word minister, and Baptist minister at that, well, they have somewhat been shattered as two words that do not successfully synthesize with, I don't know, untamable hair, or a somewhat piquant vocabulary, or my carefully coordinated socks and shoes, and my sexual orientation. Yet I am a Baptist minister. And also, I am a person that takes the Bible seriously, although not literally, and it is with that earnest approach that I will attempt to tackle the topic of sexuality and the Bible this morning. This subject is neither neat nor sterile. Therefore, I think I should give you a trigger warning, because we will be talking about sex, sexual pleasure, rape, gender identity, homosexuality, and sexualized violence. These are not easy topics, but they are subjects that are addressed in our sacred writings, and they are most certainly issues that need to be addressed in a careful and positive manner by the church. When I received this invitation to speak, my partner and I were in Savannah, Georgia, taking a break from our work as architects. He is an architect of buildings, and I am an architect of faith. And we were there to sort of revive ourselves on things that we like to do, be out in nature, see art, and be amongst our friends. So October in Savannah is idyllic. It's beautiful, the humidity has dissipated, the weather is cooled, and you can walk the entire city seeing the block-by-block strategic plan. Yet there is always something sinister that lies underneath the ideal. And this sinister thing reared its head again in Savannah. But it's something that I have been familiar with as a person of faith and a person who is queer identified for my entire life. After touring the home of Flannery O'Connor, O'Connor is both a theological and literary hero of mine. Charles and I decided to cross the park and enter the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist, the parish that O'Connor attended from birth to age 13. Upon pulling the handles of the main doors, we discovered the church was locked. I am usually formidable in all my endeavors, so I walked to the side door, and it too was locked. By this time, there was a group of middle-aged tourists, I am a middle-aged person, around me, taking pictures, holding their maps, who decided to follow us. So I go to the next door, and guess what? The door to the sanctuary, and by the way, the irony of that word was not lost on me in the moment, the sanctuary door was locked. At that moment, I placed my hand gently on Charles's back, rubbing the space between his neck and middle spine, and the gentleness of this small gesture quieted those tourists around me, and their conveyance was relegated to side glances and head shakes as they decided to walk now in the opposite direction. Scenarios such as closed doors and uncomfortable and disapproving glances have been noticeable and a regular part of my life for as long as I have been alive. Yet these scenarios seem more pronounced in a week meant for viewing of art, but encompassed by the witness of a dozen freshly made mammy dolls on the counter of a shop. A nearby placard details some revisionist jargon about the historical significance of these, quote, nurturing figures, and ignored the realities of slavery on the women and their black bodies. I also witnessed an elite antique shop display a portrait of an African-American man eating a watermelon, proliferating the image of the magical Negro, and that had a price tag of over $5,000. Racism is expensive. Yes, my own experience seemed to be in concert with a week where the president proposed defining biological sex so narrowly that transgender people would lose protection in the public arena and be erased in census datum. Where this same president heralded himself as a, quote, nationalist, unquote, and labeled asylum seekers as a caravan of refugees and bad people that were an inevitable threat to our peaceful society, where a white heterosexual man invested in such rhetoric sent mail bombs to public officials, many of those minorities, where another heterosexual man invested in such rhetoric was in Louisville, Kentucky, trying to get into an African-American church and discovering that church was not open on a Friday night, went to a Kroger and shot 2 African-American people at point-blank range. And where Saturday morning, a man, white heterosexual man, invested in such rhetoric, walked into a synagogue and killed 11 people. And we know that he did that while yelling anti-Semitic slurs, and this attack is believed to be the deadliest on the Jewish community on U.S. soil. In the world of theoretical studies, all of these things are connected. This is about as theoretical as I'll get. And there is a term to describe these connections, and it's a term that is currently receiving much attention, as it should be, and it's called intersectionality. Kimberly Crenshaw is known for the introduction and development of this idea, which studies how overlapping or intersecting social identities, particularly non-dominant identities, relate to systems and structures of oppression, discrimination, and domination. This theory addresses directly the myriad forms of oppression: racism, classism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, colonialism, ableism. And this intersectionality provides attention to the stances of privilege in our society: the privilege of race, the privilege of sexual identity, the privilege of gender identity, the privilege of place identity, the privilege of ability. But there is one place that we don't like to talk about privilege, and that is the Christian privilege. And as those of us in this room and in this region and in this country know, Christianity's voice can be pervasive, inescapable, and almost deafening. Going back to Flannery O'Connor, her home overlooked the cathedral, and at a very young age, O'Connor pronounced the South as the Christ-haunted South. Very, very telling. So from Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, Mormon, and Anglican pulpits, prejudices flow out into the pews as many denominations, seminaries, and divinity schools neglect their responsibility to promote faith that is morally obliged to be life-affirming to all creatures. When clergy are not educated on how to handle difficult biblical passages addressing aspects of human sexuality, or race, or class, or place, or ability, these prejudices are included with the reading of the Bible on Sunday morning, and these readings become embodied in our community and our world. There is a cultural perspective that biblical authority is clear and that it should be accepted without interrogation or critical thought. We've all heard this, right? God said it, it's in the Bible, I believe it. Oh my God, I wish it was that easy. The words of the text often supersede the meaning of the stories. And the rich cultural aspects of sophisticated literary devices employed in the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament are rendered null, thereby silencing the difficulties, the contradictions, the complications, and the intricacies of stories. These muted ideas allow prejudices to flourish, and many times these biases are conflated as biblical authority, and that's wrong. In my own context, I have to remind people all the time that gays are A, not always well-dressed, B, we do not break out into song from musical theaters at all times. C, I do not desire to have sex with every man that I see. D, I am not the overweight woman's best friend. That is both demeaning to me and differently bodied women. And lastly, I am not an abomination, and I am not responsible for man-made disasters, emphasis on man-made. Yet these prejudices continue. So therefore, I know what it is like, because I am gay, not to be given a job, regardless that I am the most qualified applicant. I also know what it is like, because I am gay, to be transitioned out of a job because I, quote, did not fit into the culture of the institution, unquote. I know what it's like, because I am gay, not to be called by my name or my honorific, but instead to be harassed with the terms fag, queer, or sissy. I also know what it is like, because I am gay, to watch the nightly news and see thousands of gay men dying from AIDS, with the only condolences given in the form of a quilt. I also know what it is like, because I am gay, to be physically assaulted by people I have known and some that I will never know. I know what it is like, because I am gay, to be told that a life of faith is not for me, and that because of my, quote, lifestyle choice, unquote, that I am going to hell. I also know, because I am gay, that what it is like in my own church to gather under police protection lest some fanatic commit an act of violence because he thinks such killing will stop a hurricane, bolster heterosexual supremacy, or just believe God hates fags. But I am also my mother's son. And my mother was from the low country of South Carolina and traversed an educational and economic landscape dominated by straight men. And that was often filled with challenges and humiliation. At my own childhood church, when a new minister was installed, she was asked to resign as a deacon because of a belief that, quote, women should be kept silent, unquote. That's from the letters of Paul, by the way. So I learned from my mother how to navigate shrewdly in a sexist world and how to practice what I like to call sacred trickery to make my voice heard. And I learned from my teachers at Wake Forest and Furman and Vanderbilt how to compose a network of supporting and like-minded individuals who could offer guidance and solace in a brutal world. And I learned from my mentors that words should be measured precisely and delivered boldly, and that my intelligence would be the biggest weapon against the fist of bigots. And I learned from my dad and my friends and my partner, with their impeccable timing, their gentle gifts, and their gracious acts, that anyone has the power and the potential to be an ally. So because all of that, I know that I am not alone in my struggle. And I know that the many forms of discrimination, I know what they look like. And I cannot sit still when I see it. Charles thinks I'm addicted to this. I yell and scream at the news all the time. I have neither the talents nor time nor experience to address all the forms of systemic oppression. But where and when I can, I write, or I speak, or I preach, or I protest. And I join my work with the work of like-minded individuals who are also committed to making this community a better place for all people. All people. All people. No questions asked. Thus, my work as a biblical scholar addressing issues of sexuality and the texts of the ancient Near East, my work with advocating for the rights and dignity of LGBTQIA positive people, my work with providing solidarity and assistance to people experiencing housing instability or food insecurity, my work with incarcerated individuals in our overly privatized prison system, my work towards racial equity and reconciliation, and my work as a member of several interfaith and interreligious groups is all related to a foundational group of principles. These fundamentals are clear, interconnected, and intersectional. When one person suffers, all humanity suffers. There are no innocent bystanders. nor is there neutrality. Silence kills. Ignorance also kills. And indeed, we are very much our sisters and brothers' keepers. Now, an important area of my focus is the Bible and its various interpretations and canons. And as an academic and as a minister, I have continually received calls and emails relating to such deployment of the Bible as a weapon. Sadly, in counterpoint to the beautiful truths found within the text, there are also stories that, when not treated carefully and respectfully, can be harmful, making the Bible a very dangerous book. Here are a few examples of the correspondences that I've received this year. My son is gay. Is he going to hell? What can I do to save him? I've had an abortion. Am I damned? My daughter says that she feels like a boy. Does God hate her? Every time I pray, Our Father, I think of my father who molested me. I have no idea how to pray. Help. I am queer, and my parents threw me out of the house because they said I am an abomination and I'm contrary to nature. Where do I go? My ex-wife is keeping my children from me because after I divorced, I married a man, and she calls our love sinful. I feel called to the ministry, but the elders in my church tell me there is no room for a woman, much less a lesbian, in authority positions of the church. How can I love my body or another person when the church tells me sex is shameful, sinful, and only for reproduction? I'm just going to go on point and say this. That is all from bad Bible reading. While the Bible can be deployed as a weapon, this is not how it was intended to be used. The biblical text should be a source of wealth, intelligent instruction, and amazing grace. It definitely has the potential to harm, but it also has more powerful potential and possibility to heal. Thus, let us turn to the specifics where the text intersects with policy, piety, and public life. And I want to examine places in the text that, because of ill-attempted interpretation, people are dying. Condemnation of homosexuality and same-sex love, gender and gender identity, specifically transgender identity, and sexualized abuse. These discussions will also involve rape and sexualized violence. And lastly, I will turn to places in the biblical text where queer and othered characters are empowered and given authority. When I do that, I had this conversation with Charles in the car this morning. I want you to think about, those of you who grew up in church, how many of these characters you heard about when we get to the end, and what you heard about them, and why the church told you that. And I want to say this is a conversation. I'm going to speak for just a little bit, and then I want to hear your questions. And my viewpoint is not meant to silence anyone. It's meant to really start a conversation. And like I said, the Bible was never meant to be a straightforward answer book. It is a text that sort of helps us induce the big subjects of our time, and it furthers us to ask the most critical questions. And a passage that pleads for new interpretation and critical question is one, if not the most, weaponized passages in all of the Bible, Genesis 19. None of you know Genesis 19, right? But you all know it as the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. For too long, the church has used this passage proclaiming that these twin cities were destroyed because of homosexual practices. The institution continues its reach by stating Lot is a hero and damning his unnamed wife as pining for a nefarious city. I actually really like Lot's wife. I feel like if all of humanity is being destroyed and you don't look at it, maybe there's something wrong with you. Maybe there's something wrong with Lot for just going on about his business and not looking into dying people's faces. So sadly, this translation, which keeps blaming queer identified people for catastrophes, rears its head almost every year. Pat Robertson, on more than one occasion, has stated, this particular one was in response to marriage equality, "I warned about this years and years ago that it was going to happen, and it did. It has. What next? What next, my friends, is Sodom and Gomorrah. It's just a question of how soon the wrath of God is going to come into this land." Now, Robertson has had similar statements as a response to tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, fires, airplane crashes, bombings, and mass shootings. It makes queer-identified people responsible for systemic functions well beyond our control. I wish I had that power. I would take care of a lot of things. You're all lucky I don't have that power. And this continually victimizes a minority group that is already vehemently persecuted. Yet logic is suspended and hatred and the Bible are married in few words. So let's look at this story because we all think we know the story. The two angels come to rescue Lot and his family from brutal attitudes of Sodom. Probably the first question we should ask is, how did Lot get to Sodom? Does anybody remember that? He's greedy. He and Abraham are cool. They're having all these sheep together. They're accumulating wealth. And Lot goes, "I want more." And Abraham says, "Cool, have my blessings, go over here." And God tells Lot, "Go to this city." And Lot goes, "Nah, I don't like that. I want to go to Sodom." Lot's the reason they're in Sodom. So upon the meeting, these angels or divine beings come, and Lot encourages the visitors to sleep in his home, welcoming the strangers as prescribed in the Torah. It's about the only thing Lot gets right. Then the story goes awry. While in the house, the people of Sodom gather outside of Lot's door and demand, quote, to know the strangers. If we're reading in the Hebrew, to know, to take someone's nakedness or to know someone's nakedness is not sex, it's rape. It happens all throughout. There's no consent in this story, by the way. This is where conservative biblical scholars transform this horror into sort of this orgiastic fantasy where all the men are participating in free love. Not in the text. To the contrary, verse 4 reads, "And all the people from Sodom, the men, the young, and the old, all the people surrounded the house." This is not a pornographic tale. It is an atrocious story of gang rape. And let's look who is involved. The gang of people that has no concern or care for the angels, no idea about their consent or their entrapment, highlights twice the people. And the Hebrew word for people is ha'am. And ha'am in the text translates many times to all the women. So all the people, men and women, young and old, were there to mutilate these strangers. By this time, we should see the argument is falling apart. And the story's main point is about rape. And rape is prevalent in the Bible. Noah's son rapes him after they leave the ark. Lot's daughters get him drunk and rape him twice. David most likely raped Bathsheba, and in turn, David's granddaughter, Tamar, is raped by her uncle. The Bible is clear on the issue of rape. It is wrong. And it reminds its reader that it just doesn't happen solely by those people over there, but it happens to us and by us. And these stories are complex and are designed to point out the intricacies and thought needed in a life of faith. At the ending of the rape of Dinah, after her brothers commit mass mutilation and murder of the village of Shechem, they ask, "Should our sister be treated as a whore?" Although their question is rhetorical and it's meant to justify their actions to their father Jacob, it serves as a poignant inquiry. Is violence ever an acceptable form of retaliation? And after working with incarcerated men who have been convicted of rape, I read this question differently. How do I participate in restorative justice that primarily brings healing to the victim of the crime while honoring the humanity of the assailant. If I truly believe that we are all created in some divine image, then is this divinity not true for a criminal? And God forbid we seek peace and only judge a person by their worst act. You can see the Bible is not a very clear answer book. It is a very clear question book. Yet, let's get back to Sodom. There is further evidence that Genesis 19 has nothing to do with homosexuality or queer people. The story is retold, and this is a common literary device in Judges 19 with a set of different characters. This one is known as the rape of the Levite's concubine. But unlike the divine beings in Genesis 19, the concubine does not survive. The women rarely survive. She is given over to the angry mob. By the way, when we go back to Lot, Lot wants to get the crowd out of his way. Do you remember what he does? He offers his virgin daughters to the angry mob. And we think Lot's a hero. Unlike the divine beings, though, the concubine does not survive. She's given over, she's raped and mutilated, and her body is chopped into 12 parts and sent to all the tribes of Israel. The verbs are identical. The story of rape is clear. And if this was not enough clarity about Sodom and Gomorrah, Ezekiel, the prophet, just explains us to it in Ezekiel 16, 49 through 50. That was the guilt of your sibling Sodom. They and their children had pride, excess of food, prosperous ease, but they did not share any of that with the poor and the needy. They were haughty and they did inhospitable things. Therefore, I removed what I saw. Ezekiel never mentions homosexuality, but he does emphasize the parts of the Torah that are broken. Sodom was greedy, and they were hostile towards strangers. And Jesus, too, outlines the downfall of Sodom as breaking the Torah's instruction to welcome the strangers. From Matthew 10, 14 through 15, he tells the disciple, this is where Jesus sends the 12 disciples out to all the land, which, like, when you think of all the world in the biblical world, it's like thinking of like Wake County and Johnson County and Harnett County. Like, that's what they thought the world was. Like, that's how big it was. Probably a little bigger, but you get what I'm saying. So this is what Jesus says to his disciples. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, shake the dust from your feet as you leave that house or town. Truly, I tell you, it will be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment than that town. So if homosexuality is such an abomination in Sodom and Gomorrah, then one would think Jesus would have a pretty clear message. Yet he's silent. The message, though, about Sodom is clear. But powerful people in religious institutions are more invested in damning queer people with unethical Bible reading than they are in uplifting refugees and political asylum seekers with accurate interpretations of text. Thus, this passage gets used again and again and again as a weapon. And as a result, queer people are ostracized, made invisible, attacked, denied human rights, and gunned down. The denying of LGBTQIA positive rights continues to take the form in the attack on same-sex marriage. Ted Cruz, most recently, and those of his ilk have proposed another bill to the United States Senate that protected the sanctity of marriage, hoping to undo the protections issued by the Obama administration. According to Cruz's website, marriage is a sacrament between one man and one woman. It has strengthened societies for millennia, and we must uphold the truth of marriage. Cruz and others of his kind, like James Dobson, a Focus on the Family, Al Mohler of Southern Seminary, and Mark Driscoll of the Acts 29 churches, all promote the, quote, truth of biblical marriage defined as being between one man and one woman. And we notice how the man, by male writers, is always placed first. Yet this, quote, truth, unquote, ignores some very specific laid out facts in the biblical text that run contrary to this claim. Abraham has his first child with Hagar, not Sarah. Jacob, the namesake of Israel, has two wives, Rachel and Leah, and two handmaids, Bilhah and Zilpah. Solomon, the flaunted pinnacle of wisdom in the Hebrew Bible, has 700 wives and 300 concubines. Do the math. That puts Solomon on a 3-year rotation of one woman per night. And let's just ask ourselves, who has time for that when you're running a kingdom and trying to be wise? And the book of Hosea, let's remember this one, opens with God demanding of the prophet Hosea to take for yourself a wife that is a whore, an occupation because of its nature dependent on the commerce of multiple male customers. At this point, Christians usually say to me, oh, that's in the Old Testament. Please stop saying that. It's inherently anti-Semitic because it nullifies the faith practices of Jewish people. It also nullifies the faith practices of the New Testament characters. They're all Jewish, including Jesus. He's very Jewish. And it also nullifies a particular part of your faith, the Hebrew Bible, which is more than twice as long as the New Testament. But from these New Testament figures, we have Paul and Jesus on the opposite side of the marriage spectrum. Paul, that ever-referenced apostle of more conservative Christians, abstains from all relationships because he finds the end of the world is imminent. Check out 1 Corinthians 7. Therefore, Paul shuns any romantic or physical relationships, deeming them useless, and instead he spends his time traveling with younger male comrades. Paul seems to have been wrong on both accounts. The world did not end, and I know a lot of people who find romantic and physical love very pleasurable. Similarly, Jesus, and I'm kind of assuming we're familiar with a Jesus story, is a middle-aged Jewish man abstaining from marriage. That is a very uncommon occurrence for a first-century Jew in Palestine. There could be reasons for the abstinence, including, but not limited to, the fact that Jesus himself was a disciple of John the Baptist, who was sort of this Jewish reformer that was out in the wilderness, who thought physical relationships interfered with spiritual disciplines. But Jesus is not only not married, he seems to have a negative attitude towards weddings. Jesus, you remember in John 2, Jesus is at a wedding ceremony and they run out of wine, and his mom is like, you've got to do something. And he says to her, sit down, this is no concern of mine. This attitude continues in the idea of marriage itself when Jesus is asked about the resurrection and multiple spouses. This happens in Luke 20 and Matthew 22, where they go to Jesus and says, there's 7 brothers, right? And like this brother dies and he wants to marry the other brother's wife, and in the resurrection, who's married? And Jesus says to them in both accounts, in the kingdom, no one is married and no one will get married. Why are you asking me this? Thus, Jesus also forgoes the company of women for 12 teenage boys. Evidence not so good for Jesus. Yet modern churches seem to defend a strictly defined marriage, ignoring the biblical witness. In our recent history with the 1996 Defense of Marriage Act, many of you might be too young to remember that, but that was signed into order by Bill Clinton. Let that all sink in. Everybody who thinks Bill Clinton is really liberal, he signed the Defense of Marriage Act, and the Southern Baptists were just hot. They loved it. And in fact, in the response to DOMA, the Southern Baptists said, redefining the concept and legality of marriage to mean anything other than the union between one man and one woman would fundamentally undermine the historic and biblical foundation of our society. So do you get what they just said? If anybody gets married beside one man and one woman, all hell's going to break loose. Nobody ever wants to talk about the one man and one woman who get married and screw it all up, do they? And God bless the Southern Baptists, they cited the Bible. I love when people cite the Bible. This is fantastic because as people of faith, we are compelled to place our biblical interpretation in concert with moral and ethical values, making way for generous and informative readings. And so the SBC cited these verses, Genesis 1:28, Genesis 2:24, Matthew 19:4-6. Now, I'm an ardent Bible fan, and I've studied Genesis a lot. So when I went to Genesis, I was thrilled. Genesis 1:28 states, God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful, multiply, fill the face of the earth and subdue it. So subdue, we have no idea what that word means in Hebrew. It's only used once. There are no radicals anywhere else in ancient languages that even give us a clue. So somebody at some point said, subdue. Sounds great, let's do it. And have dominion. Also, no clue what that word means. Somebody just put it in, and for years and years we thought, great, let's go have dominion over things. So let's have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over every living thing that moves on earth. So when I read that passage, here's some notable facts. The verse has nothing to do with marriage. It just says, be fruitful and multiply. The passage, though, doesn't tell us how to be fruitful or multiply. It doesn't have condemnation for infertile couples or couples that adopt or maybe couples that just want an orchid or a cat. Simply, there seems to be various options since nothing is specified. And examining the commandment to fill the face of the earth leads the careful reader to deduce that this call has been amply fulfilled. For the careful Bible reader, they will go a few chapters later to the Tower of Babel. In chapter 11, when it said, therefore it was called Babel, some of you may have heard it as Babel, because the God confused language of all the earth. And from there, God scattered them abroad, filling the face of the earth. God's already done it. And with a planet population at the moment of 7.5 billion people, maybe the rest of us should give it a break. We are spread all over the earth. We need not take up every inch of it. It is an equal misreading, as I've said, to talk about dominion and subdue as a means to squander natural resources and have flagrant disregard for the environment. The human's role should be that of caretaker and steward. God made it and pronounced it good. Therefore, we should treasure and protect this planet, not trash and pollute it. So Genesis 2:24, therefore a man leaves his father and his mother and cleaves to his wife, and they become one. Again, we have a very interesting verse picked out without any context to the meaning. These words do not address sexuality, and they do not necessarily address marriage. Davach is the Hebrew word for the cleave. And to cleave is exactly what the Moabite Ruth does with her Israelite mother-in-law, Naomi. As Naomi states in the first words of Ruth, they cleaved to each other. Ruth left her home, her father, her mother, and she accompanies Naomi to Bethlehem, where they form a new family unit. This word is used as one of the ways to describe the relationship between Jonathan and David. Their souls cleave together. To cleave is to build a family unit, not to have intercourse. If it were meant to have intercourse, then all family units would be having intercourse all the time, including right now. It would be interesting. It may also be a little distracting. In Eden, the family is a man and a woman. In Israel, it's two men joined from the two different tribes. And on the outskirts of Moab, it's two women. So finally, there's Matthew 19:4-6. Here's what we read. Jesus answered, have you not read that the one who made them at the beginning made them male and female and said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined, let no one put asunder. Although that seems rather cut and dry, the problem is that the Southern Baptists have lifted that verse out of context. That's called proof texting. We have to look at the verses around it. The verse right before it says this, the Pharisees came to Jesus and they asked him, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife about any cause? The issue has nothing to do with same-sex relationships. The issue is divorce. Divorce is allowed in Hebrew culture, and it is noted in the book of Deuteronomy when we have all the laws. So what's really behind all these statements is the use of a biblical text that appears to forbid queer identity. I say appears because the chapters and verses that the Southern Baptist Convention evoked to describe derision for same-sex marriage or homosexuality can actually be used to support homosexuality. To do this, I am going to take my cue from Jesus. Here's the thing about Jesus. Amazing reader of Scripture. Fantastic reader of Scripture. It's one of the best things I like about him. That takes us back to Matthew 9. 2 verses later in verse 7 when Jesus is asked, why then, when he's like, why are we all talking about divorce? This is what they say to him. Why then did Moses command us to give a certificate of dismissal to divorce her? And Jesus replied, it's because you were so hard-hearted that Moses allowed you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning, that was not so. I want to talk about hard-hearted. In the ancient world, your heart was not a place of emotion. It was a place of logic and reason. So what Jesus is saying is, you're stupid. You're not thinking. In Genesis 1, I want to use these same arguments about same-sex marriages. In Genesis 1, the first creation story, God creates the world, and with each step of creation, the earth and its inhabitants are amazing. They're fabulous. And after each day, God pronounces each phase of creation as good. By the end of the story, in verse 31, the merit is capitulated, and it says this, God saw everything that God made, and it was good. Maybe we should just use that verse and go home. Yet suddenly in Genesis 2, the second creation story, something is not good. And the Genesis 2 moment is the divine dissatisfaction is with loneliness. The verse states, then God said, it is not good that the earth creature should be alone. I will make it a helper or a partner. So if God says it is not good for humans to be alone, then why does the church have the right to subjugate anyone of any sexuality for loneliness or enforced celibacy? Here, as in the Jesus story, Genesis will trump the laws of our land. The biblical text is not egalitarian. It is not gender-free. It can be patriarchal and androcentric. And this by no means, though, equates prejudice, inequality, and violence as a natural and God-given right. And on the issues of gender, sexuality, and faith, there are no easy answers, but there are decisions that all of us will have to make. Here, the Bible is more than just a book. The Bible becomes a dialogue partner that allows us to fuse all our aspects of our collective lives into sacred story, and it compels us to move from theory into action. Once people of faith do this, we are able to make this transition, then the Bible becomes what it truly should be, not a rock thrown at our enemies, but a rock on which we build our foundation. And on this footing, we are able to highlight the strong presence of characters often othered in our world. There are many instances of strong women in the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament. The women are not property, and they are not derided. They are prophets. From Miriam to Huldah to Anna in the temple, the women in the Corinthian churches and Philip's daughters. They are teachers and wise people like Toka, or to Tobit's grandmother, or Priscilla, the wife of Aquila. They are judges and warriors like Deborah and Jael. They are homeowners and patrons like Mary, Martha, the mother of John Mark, Lydia, and all the women who organized and ran the house churches in Paul's letters. They experience sexual pleasure at all ages, from the postmenopausal Sarah to the middle-aged Rachel and Leah, who are fighting over aphrodisiacs, to the young woman in the Song of Song who quotes, grabs at the bolt while her lock is dripping with myrrh. That is a metaphor. We'll leave it right there. They have their own rights and their own money and their own property, like the great women of Shunem who support Elijah and Elisha, and Mary the Magdalene, who single-handedly funds Jesus' ministry. And the Jewish women in the New Testament are not oppressed, repressed, or depressed by Judaism. They are compelled by Jesus' message, just as I am. Love in the Bible is not simple. It is not a straight line. That pun is very much intended. Jacob is infatuated with Rachel, but he also greatly cares for Leah. And during his funerary rites, we discover he is buried next to her. For Jacob, Passion may have pronounced itself at the well with Rachel, and companionship may have rested with them in the grave at Leah. I have mentioned Ruth and Naomi. We have no evidence regarding the details of their relationship, but the absence of evidence is not the same thing as the evidence of abscess. What we do have is proof of one of the most beautiful covenants ever written in writing, when Ruth declares to Naomi, "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if death even separates us." Love seems both physical and romantic for Jonathan and David. 1 Samuel tells us that their souls cleave together. The narrative goes on saying that their covenant with each other bound their souls and was physically symbolized with the exchanging of robes. When Jonathan is killed in battle, David rends his clothing and demands all of Israel to mourn. He pens a poem declaring Jonathan as his great source of pleasure, the most intimate member of his family, and his greatest love. A love that was deeper than any love he had known with a woman. David is so distraught that he murders the messenger who brings him the news of his slain lover. And with the ending of each verse of that poem, David declares, "Oh, how the mighty have fallen," letting us know of his lover's death and his own diminished capacity. Love is complicated and boundless in the Bible, and like in our contemporary lives, it does not fit neatly into categories. The gender waters are more expansive when we take a closer look at the ways transforming genders and other genders are represented in the text. Adam, the first creature, does not donate his rib for the making of Eve, but he literally is opened at his penis bone to birth the first woman. Eunuchs are heralded in the book of Isaiah as people who will keep the covenant well, and they are designated as those who please Yahweh. Esther's cohorts are eunuchs who serve her faithfully, and they assist in the Hebrews people's salvation from Babylonian genocide. Daniel and his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but their Jewish names are Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. When they stood up to the Babylonian Empire, they were put in a furnace, and God stands beside all four of them. The Apostle Paul declares there is neither male nor female, and when the Jesus movement begins to spread in the book of Acts, the first person to share the good news is the Ethiopian eunuch. God, too, embraces myriad genders, transitioning between female, neutral, and male with metaphors and self-descriptors. God can be the good shepherd or the woman with a lost coin. God can be a mother bear, a father bull, a male lion, a female eagle. God can be a rock, a consuming fire, a billowing cloud, and a fortress. And God can be a woman in painful labor, ready to nurse her young. And Jesus also describes himself with varying genders. The crucifixion mirrors the language of Isaiah 49 and the birthing pains. And the climax moment in Matthew 23, Jesus self-designates as a mother hen who wants to gather her brood under her wings. The Church Universal should remember these moments before speaking and doing harm to the transgender community. The state would do well to remember these moments before simultaneously regulating bathroom assignments and proclaiming to be a Christian nation. The world of queer studies has infiltrated the academy, and contemporary divinity schools and seminaries boast queer exegesis, queer ethics, queer theology, queer history, and queer liturgies as lenses to promote inclusivity and a more just world. And these lenses are strengthened when they are put in dialogue with feminist theory and womanist theory and colonialist studies. Yet, the world of the academy cannot function in a silo. It needs all of us in every aspect of our life to transform community. We all must take action. We must all speak out when we witness bigotry in our world, and we must support those individuals because of who they are at risk for silencing and violencing. The young woman whose grandmother doesn't understand her coming out. The same-sex partners whose families cannot support their lifelong commitments. The young gay man who feels called to work in church and suffers rejection by a denominational body. The transgender parent who is rejected by their children. The HIV-positive person denied health care and community. Lesbian and gay siblings that are told by family members, "I love you, but you are going to hell." Fighting the good fight will cost us time and resources. It may hurt. We may become wounded. It may even kill us. But I am fairly certain this is what it meant when Jesus urged the disciples to take up the cross. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Hi.
How do you know if a church has LGBT ministries?
I didn't quite hear the question. I'm sorry.
How do you know if a church has LGBTQ affirmed ministries?
Yeah, how, if I'm looking for a church, how do I know if an LGBTQIA positive church is affirming to a queer community? So you'll see a lot now, like welcoming and affirming. That's sort of what that means, welcoming and affirming. So that's one of the things I would look for. In my own experience, I sat in pews, right? I'll tell a very personal story. I grew up Baptist. I grew up a very moderate Baptist in the western part of North Carolina. And I sort of mentioned it when I was talking about my mom was asked not to be a deacon anymore. If we weren't in such a public setting, I'd tell you her response to that. It's very, very, very saucy. But at that same time, they had never heard. I was 14, and the minister who came to our church started speaking against homosexuality. And my parents were sitting in a pew kind of going, this is not going to go well. We got to get him somewhere that's safe. So I think that's one of the things you look for. But I want to say this. It's about intersectionality. It's not just about, like, if you only are thinking about queer issues and not thinking about issues of race and issues of sexism, that's not good enough anymore. Like, those things have got to be combined. I mean, my struggle is very similar to other oppressed people. So I would say welcoming, affirming, but look for churches that are out there in the world doing justice. Look, that's what you need to look for. I mean, we don't want to talk about Jesus. I mean, so the irony, I'm just going to say this, is that my whole academic life and ministerial life is based on the Hebrew Bible. Enough people do Jesus. So the irony of the day is that I'm really talking a lot about Jesus. But Jesus said the kingdom is at hand right now. And I feel like so many churches are considering, the kingdom's going to be when we die or 20 years from now, that they don't want to focus on making the community a better place for all people right now. That sort of answer that? If you're looking for a list afterwards, like, come talk to me and I'll say, here's some churches I would try.
My next question is, with marriage being such a sticking point?
With marriage?
Marriage, yes. If your church is welcoming LGBTQ, then they reserve they're worried over the church-sanctioned marriage situation. How do you go about it?
Well, so I'm Baptist, so that really helped a lot, right? Because Baptist polity means I decide, my own congregation decides in and for itself what it's going to do. And my congregation went through that in the 1990s. Now, we were part of the Southern Baptist Convention by then. So that struggle took a year in my church's history. It took a lot of conversation. It took it took an amazing ally as a straight minister who said, I'm going to do this. Gay men have come and asked me to marry them, and I can't find anywhere in this book that says I shouldn't. And so it went. But I want to tell you, the real heroes in that story are the congregants because they crossed picket lines every Sunday to go to church for a year. And Fred Phelps, you know, the crazy Fred Phelps, Baptist person, God hates fags, they picketed Pullen for a long time. And so they went through that. You know, but we have other denominational stories, right? Like the UMC. I have many friends who are Methodist, and I ask them very earnestly when they say we're having an emergency meeting in 2020 to decide about homosexuality. My response is, how many people will die before 2020? And it really is about death. Queer people, transgender people, higher rates of suicide right now, higher rates of homelessness. And to me, I mean, the church needs to be addressing that. I'll be honest with you, I don't care who you sleep with. I don't think love is that straightforward. I mean, I have had congregants come to me that say, 4 of us are in love. Probably. I mean, who am I? I don't know. It also seems a little weird that we have this long history of humanity and that we have kind of made these neat little categories. It's this or this. I think with 7.5 billion people, there might be a little bit more diversity than that. It's a good question. I know sex is like a hard topic to talk about, especially when you're doing it with a minister, right? Like, am I supposed to ask these sex questions with a minister? It was important for me to talk about sexual pleasure with women because I think women's bodies are still so controlled. And I love them, you know, like you grow up hearing these stories, right? These stories, and you're told the way that you're not really reading them, you're told them. And that's reception history. It's how you've received them. And those may not actually be the stories. I love the story of Sarah and Abraham. Like when the visitors come and say, you're going to have a baby, like they're old. Abraham's tried to kill Ishmael 2 times. So they go and have this divine visit. And Abraham says in Genesis 18, verse 12, he doesn't say you're going to have a baby again. He says, we are going to know sexual pleasure again. And he laughs. Here's how you remember that. It's Genesis 18:12. Always think about Tchaikovsky's overture, 1812 overture, and think, for Sarah, the cannons are going to go off again. Yes?
I have a question that's not related to this.
Okay.
What is your experience with
I have great experience with...
no, I mean, like when it comes to sexual freedom?
Well, I cannot speak for the Muslim faith, but I will say the interreligious groups that I am in, like Imam Antipoli, who is at Duke, that is a very progressive Muslim community in terms of sexuality. I will say this, I do not cast stones at any other person's faith tradition because my faith tradition has a lot to clean up. I think we give room for all faith traditions to have these conversations, and we should be in dialogue with each other. You know, the thing that I love talking about with my Muslim friends is people don't realize how many of these overlapping stories from the Hebrew Bible and even the Jesus tradition there are in the Quran. So I think with like I will say the most progressive community, Muslim community that I know is not in this country. It's in the Republic of Georgia, which is a sister partner church with ours, and we go there once a year, and it's a Christian church, a Jewish synagogue, I know that's redundant, but some people don't realize synagogue is Jewish, and an Islamic mosque, all sharing one space. And those conversations about sexuality are amazing. Like I've learned a lot, like a lot. But I think they're just so, it goes back to dialogue, right? And relationships. I'm also going to say this. I love like what I just did about Bible stuff. That doesn't change anybody's mind. I get that. Relationships change people's mind. And here's like people that come to my church, here's where they get changed. My son is gay. This is how I've been taught to read the Bible. What in God's name do I do? My daughter is transitioning. This is how I've been taught to read the Bible. What do I do? And then they also say, you guys are the gay church. And I always say, no, we're just the church. It's like saying like you all play women's basketball, right? That's not a positive, that's demeaning. I also get a call, I'll say this, from an allegedly elite institution in Durham every year that has a divinity school, and it's a student, and they always say the same thing. I have an assignment in my class. My professor wants me to talk to a gay minister, and they've given me your name. And I always say, I don't know any gay ministers. And they're just so confounded. But I say that because I'm a minister. I mean, I wasn't called to be that's not it. I was called to be a minister, and when people say gay minister, that is not a compliment. It's a cut. So I think those dialogues are always critical. Critical. I think Christians, Jews, Muslims, people of non-faith, all dialogue. Yes?
Yeah, Cassie Anderson online, she may have came in a little bit late.
Okay.
She wants to know how long you've been a pastor and been married to your partner, and she wants you to, I'm not sure, but she wants to know, can you tell her again what church?
I'm at Pullen Memorial Baptist Church. I've been at Pullen as a member since mid-2000s and went on staff after returning from Vanderbilt University in 2015. My partner and I are not married. I think same-sex marriage, it should be an option. My thought, and I think your thought right now, is I feel no need to mimic heterosexual couples. You know, sure. I mean, I think we need a bigger conversation about marriage in our society. You know. Yeah. I mean, like heterosexual couples, yeah, right? Like marriage is tough. Like our relationship is cool, but it takes a lot of work, and I'm cool on working it without like the government telling me I need to be married. But if you want to get married, cool, go for it. I mean, I just don't feel the need to be like a heterosexual person. I gave that up years ago. Did you see the problem in that argument? Like, I had mixed feelings about same-sex marriage because there are acceptable ways for people to be gay or black or Latino or Muslim in our society. And being married was like the acceptable gay. Like I was the acceptable gay. And I mean, I don't need somebody who is not gay telling me how to be gay. I got that figured out. I need people who don't know how to be gay to wake up. Or people who are not black, I need them to wake up too. Or people who are not women, I need them to wake up. Like, all that stuff is intersected.
Maybe any of them minister,
Yeah, yeah, I get complaints all the time. Yes, so that happens in this is a brilliant question, by the way. That happens in very overt and covert ways. Of course, I have people who won't recognize that I'm a minister. I've had it when, so Pullen gets calls and we go to places where other people won't go. And right when I started, I got a call about a man who had had a heart attack and was in a coma, and he was in a same-sex relationship, and his church wouldn't go, and they wanted a minister. I don't know him, but I'll go. When I hear that story, I go. I got there, and his family would not recognize that I was a minister. It was also an interracial relationship, and so the white family did not want to recognize me. The Asian family, who was Buddhist, completely cool with me. I mean, the mom was a Buddhist monk. I was like ready to move in with her. She was awesome. But the white family, there was a lot of tension, and I had to do some difficult things in that situation. I mean, you have to honor people's humanity, but you also have to work for justice. And I had to say some things like, you can't yell at this family. You can't say things like, you know, this and this. And there was a really beautiful moment, though, when I took the man's mother into a room and we were talking to her. And it's all about relationships. And all of that peacocking and screaming settled down, and she said, "Is my son going to hell? He's in a coma. He was not going to recover." And I said, the whole neighborhood was there. And I said, "Here's what I know. I don't know your son's life, but I do know that he's loved, and that every one of his neighbors is downstairs concern, and hear. And that makes me think that he's fulfilled the greatest commandment. So I don't think your son's going to hell. But I did give her, they wanted me to do a blessing of their relationship before the passing away. And I agreed to do the blessing. And I gave them, the family, the option. I said, you're welcome to come in if you can honor this time. But you're also welcome to leave if this is not the time for you. They chose to leave, and I was fine with that. But we had that nice little moment. I don't want to demonize other people the way I've been demonized. So that's how it looks too. There are other churches in town. There's a church in Cary who did a whole series about my church, about how wrong it was. Whatever. I feed a lot of poor people. They don't. Maybe they should think about that. But then I want to talk about sort of the emotional labor that's not so blatant. I sit on a lot of places in our city with working with people who have housing insecurity or food insecurity, and it's always amazing to me when something happens, like all the other white men are addressed by their names or by their titles, and I never am. And that's not necessary. So here's what that does. It creates this space in me where I have to say, is this happening because I'm gay? It may be, or it may not be, but here's the thing. Straight white men never have to say in our society, did they not call me by my name because I'm a straight white guy? They don't have to do that. But that emotional labor is something that I have to take with me. Did I not get this job because I'm gay? Did I not get this speaking engagement because I'm gay? So that's the emotional labor that happens. It's a very good, and I think that happens with all people, right? You're Latino, you're Muslim, you're Jewish, am I not getting this house loan because I'm Jewish? Because they don't want Jews in the neighborhood? It's a great question. Yes?
So, we talked about intersectionality.
Yes.
Do you think that sort of being a queer identified person who is also a religious person fight for stigma, or could sort of take some of that stigma away compared to queer identified guys who's not religious at all?
Yes and yes, right? It depends on the audience, right? Like, I think it's healthy. It's healthy for some people to see like a normie, like not normal, like boring, like kind of person. Like, oh, so the biggest threat is not. So I think the biggest threat with gay men is that people who are not gay, when they see them as just normal. So I think that's a really big witness for me in the world. I mean, I'm pretty boring. I'm pretty normalized. Our lives together are pretty like. We cook dinner. We go to bed at, I don't know, 9 o'clock, we read books. I mean, like, and people have this idea that like we're out at a club every night and drinking heavily and having sex with everyone. Yeah, I wish. I mean, I don't have the energy. I'm old, for one thing. But I think that's part of it. And then I think it's also just really threatening. And I think how that threat comes across is so interesting. I see it, talk about intersectionality, I see it in liberal circles. Because we're very cool with lesbian ministers. We only have like in all liberal circles like the one acceptable gay man who's a minister, which says to me we're still thinking women aren't as threatening as men. And so I have some good counterparts who are ministers who are also lesbians, and we always talk about that. It's always flushing its way out in so many different ways. Yeah, but I have to tell you the biggest relief I see on faces when they find out that I'm the minister is, I talked about this before, I work a lot with homeless people, is those homeless queer youth that I see on a regular daily basis who they ring the doorbell at our church, and I go down there and I say, oh yeah, I get it, I'm gay, I know what that's like. And they're like, oh, thank God. Thank God. Like, we thought you were gonna, you look a little different, but we thought you were gonna be one of those stodgy white guys. No offense to stodgy white guys. We're really talking about a system of whiteness, not particular white men. Yes?
Are you the only person that preaches at Pullen?
No. We have a staff of 7, and of those 7, it's a diverse staff, and of those 7, 4 of us are queer identified. So we're always rotating. Nancy is usually the one in the pulpit the most. I'm in the pulpit about once every 4 to 6 weeks.
So follow-up
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're not Southern Baptists anymore. We got, that's what I meant to say. When we we've been kicked out of a lot. So let me get back. I just want to talk about what it means to get kicked out of things, especially as a Baptist. Like another Baptist telling another Baptist they can't do something is about the most un-Baptist thing you can do. But so we've been kicked out for the following. We're the church that in the early 1900s said, you don't really have to be baptized to be part of us. So, what? So the Raleigh Baptist Association, right, you guys are out. Then the North Carolina Baptists kicked us out for something else. I forget what that one was. But then we got kicked out of the Southern Baptist Convention when we were like, not only are we going to marry you, but you can come to this church and be whoever you are. You can be a full member. In fact, we want you to come. And now we have a lesbian minister. Yeah, we got kicked out real fast because of that one.
So I was asking, when you do your messages on Sunday, do you typically name your messages, obviously religious, make sure the pastors are kind of try to incorporate something more in the community?
Yeah, okay, so that's a really good question. Not always. I did preach this sermon not too long ago about Jephthah's daughter from the book of Judges. If you don't know that story, it's a horrible story. Jephthah makes this vow to God that if I can go win this war, I'll burn the first thing that comes out of my house. We should have stopped the story right there, right? Like, that's not very smart. And the first thing that comes out of his house is his daughter. And I sort of translated that into what's happening right now with LGBTQIA homelessness. So it could take the form of, I will say this is what we do well at Pullen. We have the Bible in one hand, as Bart said, and the newspaper in the other, and we're always marrying those two things. So it could be about asylum seekers, it could be about bombings in synagogues, it could be about something that's happening in the queer community. It's always an issue of justice. We are not sort of like a personal, like we don't really think you need Jesus to be saved or whatever that is. When people ask me, is my kid saved? I always think, saved from what? You? You seem to be a horrible parent. I hope they are saved from you. But that's a difference in the way we look at Jesus. We don't think Jesus is talking about personal sin. We think Jesus is talking about corporate sin. I don't know, if you think it's a sin to masturbate and you don't think it's a sin that we don't allow people to vote, you might want to readjust your morals. Or if you think it's a sin to have sex, but you don't think it's a sin for corporations to pollute the environment and not pay taxes so we can have social programs for those who need it, stop going to church. That's what I would say. If you're there to argue, I did tell a church this the other way, I got in a lot of trouble about 2 weeks ago. They came to me and like, we need you to help us. We need you to mitigate this argument for us that we're having. We're very upset because our cook told us she was having chicken tenders on Wednesday night and she served chicken pot pie. I said, I have a very easy solution. Shutter your doors and give us your money. If you went to that church, I'm sorry. That's exactly what I said. I mean, if you're arguing about chicken tenders when people are dying. But if you come to Pullen, I think you will see, a thing that you will see is that people will look like you. We have people from all walks of life. So we're a pretty high liturgical church. And so when we do communion and you see people walk forward for communion and they're from all aspects of life, it's a pretty moving thing. You're like, yeah, this is what it's about, people getting together to change the world. Oh, yeah, that's a good point. So we have people who come to, this is what church is. We have people who come to us not on Sunday morning, right? Like there's just some people, because of their backgrounds and the way they've been beat up by church, they cannot sit in a sanctuary. I totally get that. But they want to come and feed homeless people with us or register to people to vote. I think that's about as church as you get. So I'm cool with that. Like if you're not there on Sunday morning, but you want to help me on Tuesdays and Thursdays feed 150 homeless people, and sit down and know people's name and give them dignity, I could care less if you sing a hymn. My friend from Minneapolis, did you raise your hand? Did you raise your hand? No. Oh, sorry. Okay. I thought somebody raised their hand. Yes, ma'am.
So I think you talked about how so like the Bible is used in a way that was
Mm-hmm.
You said it could be used differently. How do you feel about the separation of church?
I'm very much for the separation of church and state. I mean, like that's a Baptist principle, separate the church from the state. And when I hear about churches, especially Baptist churches, like, that makes me crazy. I mean, we have separation of church and state for a Baptist, because of a Baptist, Jeremiah Moore, and Thomas Jefferson. Jeremiah Moore is this crazy Baptist. So here's what's happening in American history, right? Like, if you're not of the Anglican church and you go out and preach, they throw you in jail. So they throw Jeremiah Moore in jail, and Thomas Jefferson is like, that's crazy. And he goes to Jeremiah Moore and he goes, I don't know if you know, Thomas Jefferson's a really interesting reader of the Bible. Like, he makes the Bible and cuts out the parts that he doesn't believe in and throws it out and has his own Bible. I encourage you all to do that. Like, if there are parts in the Bible that I'm like, I can't read that. Howard Thurman's grandmother was like, who was African-American civil rights leader, says, I'll never read the writings of Paul. Slaves, be obedient to your master. She never read those. So throw those parts out. So he goes to Jeremiah Moore. Thomas Jefferson goes to Jeremiah Moore and goes, I think you're crazy, but you have the right to be crazy. And the state does not have the right to tell you not to read this book and not preach this book. So I'm very much for the separation of church and state. But that's also for two reasons. So the church can be prophetic toward the state, and the state does not govern the church. So I need that so I can look at the state and say, like what it says in Isaiah 10, woe to you who legislate unjust laws. We don't like to hear that one. We like to talk about homosexuality. We don't like to talk about those verses that the verse talks back to the empire and says, woe to you who trample on the poor and the needy. I mean, talking about, I mentioned this about the welcoming the strangers. Welcoming the strangers is in both of those texts like 400 times. And we have these maybe 5 or 6 places that are so nebulous that are used about homosexuality. But we'd rather use those 4 or 6 places than those verses about welcoming the stranger. That makes no sense. Yes?
What is kind of a loaded question, but what would you, because you answer that question, what would you tell a person, like, you come out, what would you tell them, and they tell you, like, it's unnatural, it's a sin, you're going to hell, because it's not?
Yeah, I've had to do that, right? I know what that's like. So I will say this, my immediate family, like, luck of the draw. Like, my mom and dad are, like, amazing people. Like, I told them I was gay. Like, I have the most boring coming out story of all time. I come home and tell my parents they're gay, and they're like, sure, great. What do you want for dinner? No big deal. My dad's family, though, is very, very conservative. And there's part of that that's like the presence, like you just show up. But there came a time in our lives where that animosity became violent, and I had to make a choice. And my choice was, I don't have to be around you. And I'm cool with that. I don't wish you harm, but I'm not going to participate in your violent rhetoric. And I love myself too much and know what I'm doing in the world is right to participate in that. Now, I make that sound easy. It's not. It is not. And by the way, that all happened at my grandmother's funeral, where I was going to deliver the sermon for my grandmother's funeral, and I had 2 of my uncles say, if you get in the pulpit, we'll shoot your faggot ass. That happens. Like, if you're a queer person in the room, you didn't flinch over that one, did you? Like, that's part of a daily existence sometimes. You have to make those choices. It's hard not to demonize that person. That's what I was trying to get across. It's hard not to demonize that person. But I'm also at the point in my life where my first obligation is to those who are oppressed. I feel no need in my life at the moment. I feel no need in straight people who are vitriolic to help them understand the gay community. You do the work. You do the work. I have no need right now to tell, you can tell I'm a Baptist, I'm about to get riled up. I have no need right now to say to straight white men, this is what it means like to not be straight and white and a man in our country. You've had a lot of privilege, do the work. Open your eyes. People are dying. It's a good question. What do you want to? He's more gracious than I am, if you can't tell. I'm the firebread in the family.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's like internally, like the conversations you have with other ministers. Like,
Yes,
like, you know,
yes.
It's not, there's a spectrum.
There is a spectrum, you're right. It's not this or that. There is a spectrum, and there are folks in my life who are not where I am, and I know that they're important work, but they're making effort. And so I don't mind, like, saying beautiful things like, there's that, but there is also this. Or, you know, like the thing we all do now. There's that, and you might want to think about, you know, this. But it is about relationship. It's about bringing those ministers in and saying, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and saying, I want you to sit down at this table with me. These 4 folks who are under the age of 15 lived in rural North Carolina, and their families drove them to Raleigh and put them out of the car, and they're homeless because they're trans, they're gay, they're asexual, they're non-gender conforming. And then when that happens, that works a lot better than the Bible. Yes, sir.
How long do you think it's going to take until other churches kind of like accept what you guys are doing?
Gosh. Okay, so I'm going to answer that question in several ways. So I sent this lecture yesterday to my good friend who's a feminist, and she called. I wanted her to, like, all the stuff at the end with the women, I wanted her to read that to make sure, like, I was checking my own male privilege. And she called and she goes, it's really, really beautiful. This is exact quote. I don't know if I can say this in here, but I'm going to say it. I'd say it in my pulpit. She said, you ever get tired of having to say this shit over and over again? Yeah, I do. I get real tired, real fast. And I do get tired. But I also know that, that my faith is not dependent on an outcome. My faith is dependent on showing up and doing it over and over and over again. So here's how I feel about that, about the United Methodist Church having a lovely emergency meeting in 2020. Good for you. Have at it. I'm still going to be here. I hope you catch up. And for all those queer identified people who are United Methodists that can hear my voice right now, if they're telling you you are not accepted and loved and created in a divine image, I want to say that you are. And you are welcome at Pullen. So that's what I would have to say to that. I'm going to keep doing it. Hope you're still around. I think you're either going to have to adapt. Your faith should be timeless, and it should adapt to the society that you're in. That's what we see from the ancient writers. If not, you know, yes.
So, so how often do you think churches kind of use the Bible the way they use it, sort of like with a pluralism or homophobia kind of scripture, because they actually sincerely believe that it's interpreted that way, or they interpret that way people power and
Yes and yes, right? I feel like every question I'm asking from you is yes and yes. So when I was writing this, I read the part about Adam to Charles, and he was like, you got to stop and tell people like why that's translated that way. So it's, you know, you've all heard the story about Adam and Eve, right? Like, and God took the rib from Adam and made Eve. No. Okay, so God does go in 2:18 like, loneliness, not cool. I need to give this earth creature, which, by the way, Adam means earth creature, Adam as Adama in Hebrew, earth creature from the earth. So maybe that was a political thing that we didn't translate it that way, and we translated man from whatever, disconnecting how connected we're supposed to be. And then, like, after he says that, God goes, or she says that, or it says that, God brings all the animals, right, to Adam and says, I don't know, Adam, porcupines. Does this seem cool to you? octopus. I don't know if God had brought me an octopus, a jellyfish, or an elephant, y'all would not be here. Super cool animals. I would have said, that's a great partner. I'm down. Let's do it. But it's only after that when Adam is like, no, I can't possibly, live with orca, or I can't possibly live with like a terrier, that God sort of makes this whole sacred coma, and it's a birthing story. But that's not unusual. Those stories happen all throughout the ancient Near East religions. Men are put to sleep and somehow birth all of humanity. It's also very common in ancient Near East religions where like one god will start as a female, transition to male, go back to a female. We have gods that are in same-sex relationships in the ancient Near East. No, this like the sexuality and gender stuff that we're all hung up on now, they were not hung up on this as much in the ancient Near East. I'm not saying that men didn't have privilege. Men had privilege, but it didn't get, we know we have leaders that transitioned with gender. Hatshepsut, I love the story. She is an Egyptian pharaoh. She has a 4-year-old that's not hers. It's her husband's 4-year-old, 4 or 5 years old. And the husband dies, who's the pharaoh. And Hatshepsut is supposed to be the pharaoh until the boy becomes of age. She's not having that. She gets a taste of power and she loves it. She kills the kid. She's one of Egypt's longest rulers. And when she travels to the ancient Near East to convey with all these other kings, she puts on the dress of a man, including a beard, and presents herself as a king through like Assyria and Babylon. And the other kings refer to her as a king. So I think they're a lot cooler with stuff than we are. But I think it is about power, right? Like people are like, I think people make power decisions in translating. And we want to keep, the church wanted control. Some churches still want control. And I think we got to stop that. But I also realize like, we're like the lone fish in a big sea. So I mean like control and power, a lot of things happen with those two things. Yeah, so, this is why you read the Hebrew Bible with the New Testament. Like my own personal theory about the New Testament, and I did not come up with this, I wish I did, is that it's a way for the communities that really thought Jesus was cool to be Jewish. And these are Jewish liturgical stories that would have fit into the Jewish liturgical year. I'll give you an example. We all know the story of Moses, right? He goes out into the desert with the Hebrew people for 40 years. And then they finally find the promised land. So we retell that story with Jesus. Jesus doesn't need 40 years. Jesus does it in 40 days. How cool is that, right? You know the story of Elijah, and you might all say Elisha, it's Elisha. But you know, like I like to call this where Elijah does like holy CPR on the kid who dies, and like he lays on him, and then he sneezes on him 7 times, and the kid finally gets up. It's a really bizarre story. Very queer story, I think. But then like, Jesus doesn't even need to see the kid. Jesus just calls the kid's name like from the next town and the kid's okay. So these are stories that were probably really important in the synagogue. And for these, Jesus is not a Christian. He is a Jewish reformer. And then when you put the stories from the Hebrew Bible in sort of dialogue with all the religions from the ancient Near East, like we have so many flood stories, so many creation stories, so many Tower of Babel stories. And so it's really interesting to see how they're all influencing. I will say this, I'm always careful about scholarship, and like you always hear the thing about Jewish people in the Hebrew Bible is like they were so monotheistic. They were the first people to believe in one God. Not true. I spent a year of my life translating these little tablets at the Oriental Institute in Chicago that were from this Elephantine community the Elephantine community is like this little island between Persia at the time and Egypt. And so it's a Jewish community, and like Persia's army would go through it every day. So here's what I learned. Those Jewish people on the island they were going to everybody's temple, keeping their bases covered. I mean, they were like, Yahweh's super cool, but Asherah is also amazing. Let's go to her temple. So they're doing that. Here's another thing. Women were suing for divorce. We have so many records where women were suing for divorce because these were land contracts. There's nothing romantic about a marriage in the ancient world. It is a land contract. So like if Charles came to some young woman, we'd all laugh, but say he did, and he said he had, 35 acres, and they get married, and he did not have 35 acres. She had the right to sue for divorce, and that happens in the world. Eunuchs also sued the empire a lot because if you were a eunuch, you were kind of heralded. And I want to just say a eunuch is not the same thing as a transgender person. A eunuch is a physically mutilated person, but it was seen as a different gender. And a lot of eunuchs did not survive. Gender mutilation for a eunuch happens at birth and can involve like serious bleeding. And so a lot of eunuchs died. But if they did make it, like they were given wealth like you wouldn't believe in the ancient world until they died. And all the wealth went back to the empire. Their families sued a lot to keep that wealth. So be careful about what you read. The Bible, whatever translation you use, even if you're using the Hebrew, it has an agenda. It's written by really wealthy people who could write in the ancient world. Not a lot of those, but it has an agenda. I also say this, like when we talk about miracles, kind of on the same thing. I don't believe in miracles. I mean, I shouldn't say that. I don't believe in miracles the way they're written in the Bible. Like, I don't believe like parting of water. I don't believe that stuff. I think they're stories. I do believe in miracles, and I think the biggest miracle is this. I studied this text, the Hebrew Bible and the text, and let me tell you, the Hebrew people were nothing. If 600,000 people would have gotten up out of Egypt and walked away, the Egyptians would have had records. They were amazing keepers of records. The Persians, amazing. The Persian Empire is bigger than Rome ever thought they could be. There is no such thing in the book as Israel. That is aspirational. What we do have is this little community called Yehud. And Persia marched its army through it every day to get to Egypt, their biggest enemy. These two huge empires of this ragtag group of people. How many Persian gods do you know? How many Egyptian gods do you know? How many Hebrew gods do you know? That's amazing. That's kind of like why I do it. But I also think my God is probably similar to their God and all kinds of other stuff that. Yes?
I know you mentioned something about supporting teens, teenagers.
I'm sorry, I can't hear. Yes, ma'am. I can't hear a thing. I'm sorry.
Quick question. Do you have like a support group for, say, a teenager comes home and announces that he's gay and the parents is so
Yes.
devastated? Do you have
Yeah. Yeah, so that she's asking, does our church have an LGBTQIA support group? Yes, we do. It meets on Monday nights at 7 o'clock in our chapel. Our church is at the corner of Hillsborough and Cox. The chapel is the part of our building that looks like a spaceship. It's new. The sanctuary looks like it was built in 1920 because it was. The chapel was built 6 years ago, 7 years ago, something. It looks like a spaceship. They meet in there. It's a great support group. It's people who are parents, who are allies, who are identified, and they all talk. It's a really good, that's one thing. The second Sunday of each month, we have LGBTQIA sort of luncheon, and you don't have to go to Pullen to come to that. I think they meet at Brick's Pizza in Cameron Village, and you just kind of show up and they'll welcome you. Also, if you ever have a biblical question, you can always email me. And yes?
I have a biblical question.
Oh, good.
I hope you know.
Yeah.
How do you approach Leviticus 18?
Yeah.
22 in the Bible?
Yeah, so let's talk about the Levitical Laws. So I did ask today, are they bringing their Bibles? So the Levitical Laws, we have two places in the Levitical Laws, right, that should be dealt with. These are two of the hot spots. One is you shouldn't wear, like if you're a man, you shouldn't wear women's clothing. And the other one is a man should not lie with a woman. That's how it gets translated. That verse should say, the man should not take the man's nakedness as he takes the woman's. So we've already discussed that one, right? That has nothing to do with consensual sexuality. That has everything to do with rape. Hebrews, like, rape is a bad idea. I want you, if you leave with that, I did a great job. Rape is a bad idea. Really, really bad idea. So when you bring the Hebrew out into English sometimes, we have lost so much. We really lost a lot of beauty. I do want to talk about the other one about, everybody thinks it's so crazy about women and men's clothes. So that comes from practices that Assyria and Babylon did when they would go into war. They would make these dolls, and it's part of their cultic or religious practices, and they would dress the dolls in demeaning ways as sort of to curse the military. So that's where that comes from. So it's not saying like, I mean, here's the biggest one that's like, talk about a man who dresses like a woman, Joseph. All that stuff about his coat, oh my gosh, that story is like, that's about as gay as you get with clothing, Joseph. I mean, in the ancient world, you're going to have that really bright colored, you know. I also say be careful the way you read the Joseph story. Joseph is not the hero. Joseph is responsible for putting the Hebrew people into slavery into Egypt. Yeah, so. And also interesting, Potiphar is a eunuch. That's why Potiphar's wife is trying to get with Joseph, because Potiphar is a eunuch and can't fulfill their sexual duties. So that's how I would approach the Levitical laws.
So unless we have any more questions, we probably need to get going now. We have an event, actually, Wake Tech Idol. Is it 11 o'clock in here? Is anybody doing that? No? Okay. Well, let's thank our speaker.
Thank you. Thank you.